Hey, it's Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. Now, I was looking for fun ways to tell you that Mint's offer of unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month is back. So I thought it would be fun if we made $15 bills. But it turns out that's very illegal. So there goes my big idea for the commercial. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Speed slow after 35 gigabytes if network's busy. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
Hello there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode number 747 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. It is Tuesday, September 2nd, 2026. Hopefully you had a great Labor Day weekend and a great first weekend of college football. I am Donald Juan. I'm your host for this episode. As we take off, since this is episode 747, as we take off, Jason Evans is in the air right now. So he is not with us. He's coming back from the Jersey Shore after what feels like a 3-year vacation for him. I hope he had a great time. But in his absence, we have the great Scott Rich with us. Scott, how you doing, man? It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been an interesting summer. There may or may not be a new member of Kara Lawson's recruiting class of 2037 coming from the Rich household. Had a daughter in June. And of course, I'm super excited. It's the greatest thing in the world. But the bonus part of it is she may have one of the best unintentional Duke names ever. So her name is Quinn Cameron. Mm-hmm. Neither of which were chosen for their Duke reference. Quinn was just a name that my wife and I loved. We loved a Q name for whatever reason. And then my wife came up with the idea for Cameron for the middle name. And I just sort of had to bite my tongue and be like, yeah, I like that. That
Sounds
works.
Good. I like how that flows. And then you win the corner, you're like, yes.
Exactly. And so I'm going to put it out to the DBR podcast universe. If anyone wants to fulfill my dream for Quinn's nursery and find me a Quinn Cook autograph and a Cameron Boozer autograph for the perfect, wall portrait for Quinn's nursery, send us an email. I'm going to say us. Send us an email, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. And
we will make sure it gets to you. If somebody's able to get it, we will make sure that you get it.
Hook this up, make Quinn Cameron a Duke Blue Devil. Because again, I live in stores now. It's going to be real hard for her to not become, at least on the women's basketball side, a UConn Husky fan. So help me out, DBR Nation. Help me indoctrinate her right from day one, because she's going to be indoctrinated the other way living in stores.
I look forward to supporting her NIL fund by buying a jersey in 2037 when she matriculates to Duke.
I will say, she's tall. She's 98th percentile in height. She got my wife's volleyball jeans so far, so let's keep our fingers crossed.
Hey, it doesn't have to be basketball. It could be volleyball. It could be track. It could be soccer. Whatever she wants to do, the world is her oyster. Congratulations, Scott. That is a great, great deal, and hopefully everything continues to blossom with young Quinn. Let's get into football, because it was a football weekend. There's not any basketball news released, so we're going to discuss football on this episode. We will start, obviously, with our Duke Blue Devils, who opened up on Thursday night. As we mentioned in the last show, we recorded just before that game, and of course, Duke opens with a 45-17 win over Elon. It was close at the half, 10-10. But then Duke outscored Elon 35-7 in the second half. Scott, I turn to you because I want to start, first of all, with the prize recruit, the prize transfer in Darian Mensah. 27 for 34, 389 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. And it looked like, for the most part, he had a really good feel about, pocket awareness and finding his guys. And most importantly, he was getting the ball downfield and creating some big plays.
Yeah, Darian Mensah was as advertised in a national landscape where one of the, the big storylines was a bunch of these new coming quarterbacks, sort of underwhelming. Obviously, the headlines of those being the Ohio State-Texas game, which everyone in the country was watching. Darian Mensah really did live up to the billing. Anytime you're going 27 for 34 for almost 400 yards, it doesn't matter who the competition is, that's impressive. Unless we forget there were a couple of very blatant drops early on in the game that would have made that an even more impressive stat line. I'm with you. I thought the most important thing going down the line was how he was making the reads and how he was making the hard throws look easy. This was not a 27 for 34 with dink and dunk passes. Yes, there were some of those. That's sort of part of the Manny Diaz offense, spreading it out and sort of doing some of those bubble screen type plays. But he was making the passes downfield that you expect a quarterback with his caliber, with his hype to make. Again, it's against Elon. Everything about this game has to be taken with a grain of salt. But if you're a Duke fan, if you're one of those NIL people who contributed to the collective to get Darian Mensah on campus, you have to be pretty excited with what you got on day one.
Yeah, Scott, and I think the best part about you mentioned the fact that Mensah was getting the ball downfield. He wasn't just doing the bubble screens, but I thought that for the most part, the coaching staff did a great job at allowing him to kind of do some of those things. It really opened up Elon's defense quite a bit for them to maybe do a bubble screen in one play and then go downfield the next. It felt like all of these moves were setting each other up. And even the run game, we had a couple of great long runs. One went for 63 yards. And then you also had, Jacquez Moore. It looked a little bit improved. Now you take out the 63-yard run, and maybe it's a little bit more muted of a performance from the running game. But I think the running game was deployed at times to set up things downfield, and I thought Darian Mensah did a great job at finding his receivers. A lot of targets. There was a lot of guys that had multiple receptions, and I think that I'm looking forward to seeing that continue to improve. And I think after the game, Manny Diaz said, "We're not there yet, but it wasn't a great game. It wasn't the best game that they could put together. But this is a good start against a good team. Now, will they have to turn it up a notch with Illinois coming to town this weekend? Absolutely. But I think this is a good first step."
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for areas of improvement on offense, I actually think the running game is where you have to look. Jacquez Moore, if you take out his 32-yard carry, he went 6 for 12. So there's a lot of efficiency that can be gained from that, especially given that the big dash running game was a part of Duke's success last year, given that, part of the positive momentum for Duke this year was the returning strength of the offensive line. The fact that we weren't able to push around a Elon team that, when you play a team from the FCS, you expect to be bigger and stronger than them in the trenches, maybe a slight cause for concern. But again, just like you have to balance things out by the fact that Elon is a lower tier team, you also have to balance everything out with the fact that this is week one in college football where you don't have preseason or anything like that. So it's all these initial takes have to be balanced by, both the pros and the cons of week one. On the receiving side, Barkati was, I think, a revelation. I don't think many people pegged him as being the dominant number one receiver. People were looking maybe to, Andrell Anthony, the transfer who has a greater pedigree coming from Michigan and Oklahoma, to step in. Maybe looking for Samir Hagans to step up to that number one role, which I think Samir had a good game. I think he showed more of that. He showed more than being the home run threat, in this game, which I think is a good step forward for him. And then Quayshawn Brown is a guy that, again, I don't think was on many people's radars, but he was the second leading receiver, 6 for 93 for the game. So it'll be interesting to see how that receiving room sort of falls out, because again, the guys that I think most Duke fans recognize the names of, Hagans and Anthony, were, the third and fourth guys. The guys who we didn't recognize, Barkati and Brown, were the ones who led the way with Mensah. It'll be interesting to see how much of that is week one Elon, or how much of that is these were the guys who earned the reps and are the number one and number two receivers for Mensah.
Yeah, the interesting thing is Hagans, I thought, as you mentioned, did well, but he also, again, like 2 touchdowns. And he had great hands and was able to be a veteran presence out there. Quayshawn Brown is trying to kind of shed his role of being just known as a returner. and kind of get into the fact that he can be a really good threat, especially deep. And I think Barkate did both, right? He kind of was like the possession guy. He also did a couple downfield. And again, I thought Mensah did great at finding those guys, checking down when he needed to find other guys. And the fact that Barkate has 5 receptions, Quayshawn Brown has 6, Higgins has 5, multiple guys have 2 or 3 receptions. That means he was going to people and going to them often. I think one thing that's going to be generated through this also that wasn't quite yet, but he's coming back from injury is Jeremiah Hasley, who tore his ACL against Northwestern in week 2 last year. And he was supposed to be a huge presence on that team last year. So the fact that he's back and he's able to, again, be a possession guy and help move the chains is going to be really good. And also, if all these guys are catching the ball, there wasn't a lot of drops. You mentioned the few big ones, but there weren't a lot of drops out there. And if these guys can be reliable at catching the football, that just presents more options for the offense. And also any defense that we face has to really figure out how to check all these guys. You're going to have to go into nickel packages, and that could open up areas for the offense to motor through. But as you mentioned, that running game still needs to be there for that to happen. I think that's the balance that's probably going to be in the mix as they look forward to Illinois.
Yeah, you can't beat a Big Ten team without running the ball. And Illinois is a team that, while they're not a traditional football powerhouse, they're coming off one of the best seasons in their program history. They returned a heck of a lot of the guys who contributed that season, which you don't necessarily expect from a team like Illinois having a banner year. So Illinois is a legit top 15, top 20 team that's coming into Durham next week. And if Duke wants to have those higher aspirations to take the step forward from, the heights of the Mike Elko and the early year 1 Manny Diaz, we want to take that step forward and really compete at the national level. It starts by beating a team at that level in your own stadium next week. I think Duke's going to have to run the ball better to do that. It's going to have some semblance of clock control. It's going to have a few of those grinded out 8-10 play drives rather than relying on the one big run or the one big pass play in order to get it on the board.
Yeah, and as we look forward to Illinois, I will say this. We'll probably talk a little bit about it later this week. But one thing that Duke has asked everyone to do, that is going to the game on Saturday, wear blue. It's going to be a blue out. So find your best Duke jersey, your best Duke shirt. Make sure it's the nice Duke blue and bring it out to combat against the Fighting Illini. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we're talking more football. There was a lot of college football to watch this weekend. It was the first full weekend of college football. We'll talk about who won the weekend and who lost the weekend after this. Between busy schedules and summer plans, sometimes all I've got is a couple minutes. Factor helps me eat smarter with tasty, chef-prepped meals that are dietitian approved and delivered right to my door. And now, with more than 65 weekly meals made for how I live and what I like to eat, I've got even more ways to fit in a real meal wherever the day takes me.
Yeah, that's right, Donald. Not only are they quick to heat up, but now you have a wider selection of meal options, including premium seafood meals like salmon and shrimp at no extra cost. And for the first time, try Asian-inspired meals with bold flavors from China, Thailand, and more. It's responding to what Factor members wanted. That's why 97% of customers say Factor has helped them to live a healthier life. Feel the difference no matter what your routine is.
So eat smart at factormeals.com/DukeBB50off. Use that code DukeBB50off to get 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code DukeBB50off at factormeals.com for 50% off your first box plus free breakfast for 1 year. Get delicious, ready-to-eat meals delivered with Factor. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. The next chapter of Audi is here.
Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
All right, we are back. We are shifting our gears to the rest of college football as the FBS opened up the 2025 season. And let's start, Scott, within the ACC, because I think there is a few notable games in the ACC that were good to note. The first one is I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna mention my team, Miami, beating Notre Dame at home, 27-24. The number 10 Miami. They actually the AP poll released about 30 minutes ago. They are up to number 5 in the AP poll. I think they're 7th in the coaches because of that win. A huge win on national TV on Sunday night. Again, the only game really on TV at that time. And I think it was one of the signature games of the entire college football weekend. But there are also a few that I think were significant that were within the ACC. Notably, Florida State beating Alabama. Doak Campbell Stadium has been remodeled fully. It was a rocking crowd. They become the first ACC team to earn a fine by storming the field. $50,000. They're $50,000 lighter, but I'm sure they don't care because they beat Alabama. Georgia Tech beating Colorado on the road. That was a pretty decent game, and Georgia Tech held off Colorado at the end. And then the Battle of Death Valley, which I don't know why this hasn't been a rivalry before. I know they faced a few times before, but I like the fact that LSU and Clemson are battling, the two teams that call their stadiums Death Valley. And number one, the first game goes to LSU. They beat Clemson 17-10 in Clemson. So that was a pretty significant one as well. We'll talk about the one that happened on Monday night in a second. But Scott, before that, anything that you noted from the weekend?
So on the lighter side, we always talk about, okay, what merits a court storming in basketball? What merits a field storming in football? I'm sorry, but if you're Florida State and you value yourself as a top tier program, if you think you're so good that you're better than the rest of the ACC, then you should not be storming the field. The fact that they were storming the field, even if it was Alabama, was just so reflective of how down they were after last year, rather than what they think of themselves as a program. I think that was interesting, which, especially considering Florida State, that didn't seem like an upset. In the game, if you take away the stupid preseason rankings, which are always wrong, Florida State seemed like the superior team to Alabama. And I think that's why so many people were a little taken aback by it, is that wasn't a particularly competitive close game for most of the way. Florida State was safely in control. They were moving up and down the field as they needed to. Alabama was really struggling. Their only offense came from a couple, big sort of spurt plays. So Florida State looks like a team that is legit and is going to compete in the ACC. On the flip side of things, as excited as we were about Darian Mensah, part of that excitement comes from comparison, and Clemson is the perfect example of that. Cade Klubnik comes in with, preseason Heisman hype, people thinking maybe he's going to compete for the number 1 overall pick in the draft, and really looks very, very average. Yes, against a good LSU team, but at home, a place where you think Clemson should be beating just about anyone in Death Valley, in their Death Valley. That should give Duke fans just a little bit more appreciation for the fact that Darian Mensah did look as advertised. Again, all caveats aside. Those two results, I think, go to the point that it was a sort of a mixed bag for the ACC on the whole. But that said, it was a mixed bag for everyone. If you look at all the four major conferences, and really it's 2+2 nowadays, everyone had a little bit of a mixed bag. There wasn't a conference that dominated week one, that dominated the marquee non-conference games like there has been in the past. In the past, after week one, it's like, okay, well, it's the SEC and everyone else. It's super clear the SEC just annihilated every power conference foe, by 2 scores. That didn't happen. We saw Alabama go down to Florida State. We saw other SEC teams lose. So I think it really does go to show that it is a fairly level, more open landscape than it has been in the past. There isn't a super dominant team. We'll talk more about this when we talk about some non-ACC games. But I didn't see a super dominant team out there in week one this year like we have over the past 10, 15 years, when it's super clear after the first couple of games who's in that top tier and who's the rest.
You mentioned Florida State. They leapfrog into the top 25. They are now number 14. So again, a lot of people saw that game and went, oops, we made a mistake. Let's go ahead and correct that immediately. And we're going to see that volatility in the first few weeks of the polls. But I also think that you mentioned the ACC, not really doing well. They didn't do terrible. Everyone just kind of had their wins and losses. And I think also for the ACC, it really is important because the way you get multiple teams into the playoff is by beating some of these conferences, namely the Big Ten and the SEC. You have to win some of those games. You don't have to win all of them. So that Florida State game may not really help Florida State. It could help Clemson down the line.
It helps everyone who beats Florida State this year.
Right. It helps everyone who beats Florida State, but it also just helps when they go, oh, the ACC can't be that bad because, Alabama lost to an ACC team, right? Like those sort of games add up and they kind of compare conferences that way. Now, will it really affect it down the line? Because, if Alabama runs the table, will they look back and they go, oh, but they lost to Florida State, they're not going to get the playoff? It depends. I think that's just how the SEC is captivated college football along with the Big Ten. But I do think one game that is going to be important, right? Going back to our game against Illinois this week, could be important. Maybe not just necessarily for Duke, but for the ACC to kind of show that, hey, these teams that we are saying haven't much improved, they can go up against any team in the country and they can give them a good game. And so I think that's why, and especially in this first weekend, which was billed as one of the best opening weekends of college football ever, the fact that we had some of our team names in that win column is a big deal. When you have the takeaways of the weekend being Florida State being Alabama and Miami being Notre Dame, those are two of the biggest games of the weekend, and ACC comes out on top, albeit Notre Dame being that tweener that doesn't want to play with us during football season, but wants to be with us at everything else. I think that's still a good thing. Now, the one thing that's going to ruin it is the fact that there was one team that ESPN has kind of latched themselves onto. And last night, Monday night, they didn't do well. I'm talking about UNC. UNC goes down to TCU at home 48-14, and it was really not that close. Everyone was there. Every UNC person who could be a UNC person was there. Everyone who has ever played for Bill Belichick was there. And I will say the funniest part was not necessarily the fact that they lost 48-14, is that Michael Jordan's plane took off at the end of the third quarter from Raleigh-Durham Airport. He didn't even stay for the third quarter. So that's how bad a beatdown it was.
Yeah, it says something when you create a coronation and you fall flat on your face. I think that a rational college football fan would have said, hey, year one for Bill Belichick is probably not going to be New England Patriots Bill Belichick, regardless of, any expectation. Now, ESPN fueled the fire. Oh my God, Bill Belichick, the biggest name in football, is going to going to UNC, but UNC also bought into it, right? UNC created this whole extravaganza, this coronation of Bill Belichick returning. But that you didn't need to lean into it like that, right? This wouldn't have been so embarrassing if the expectations were, hey, we have 70 new players. Basically, no one on the field will have played with each other before this game. Maybe we should pump the brakes on the expectations. And lest we forget, that's not something that happens in the NFL either. It's not like Bill Belichick has experience with that much turnover. In the NFL, you have a core group of guys that know the system, that have played with you over years and years and years. That's part of what made Bill Belichick Bill Belichick. So there was no reason to think this was going to look good in week one. No one in the rational mindset outside of ESPN trying to make a very average game seem more interesting on their Monday night because that's all they had, and the diest of diehards in Chapel Hill would have thought that this would have gone well. But because of everything around it, it just became this microscope. And as Duke fans, we get to laugh and chuckle a little bit because they fell flat on their face, and maybe all this hype and maybe all the silliness around this whole offseason, maybe that wasn't the best idea.
Yeah, well, we talked about how the fact that ESPN was trying to move games around so that they could feature UNC prominently as if they were going to be a top 10 team. And this is a team that routinely goes 8-4, right? Like clockwork, they go 8-4. I think they have only 2 10-win seasons or something like that, 2 or 3 10-win seasons in the last 35 years. And all of a sudden, Bill Belichick was supposed to be this guy to come in and change it all. We knew that wasn't going to be the case. Even at New England, it took him a couple years to kind of get into motion. But I will say this, hats off to TCU, because TCU has been through this before. They went through it 2 years ago when they hosted Colorado in prime and Deion Sanders' first game as head coach. They lost that game right after being in the national championship game. And I think it was the head coach afterwards was like, we remember that hoopla, and we heard all the people basically talking about this game, and not once did they mention Texas Christian University, and we took that personally. So hats off to them for stepping up and understanding, hey, we know how to deal with a circus, so let's send the circus back out on the road.
And on that point, and obviously this is a bit of a side avenue for us as a Duke podcast, but I gained a new appreciation for what Deion Sanders has done at Colorado after seeing how hard it was for Bill Belichick last night. Deion Sanders' first year, yes, he had some issues as well, but he wasn't quite like this. And so the fact that what Deion Sanders has done with Colorado, a lesser name program in a lesser conference with lesser resources, in somewhat similar circumstances in terms of roster turnover, bringing in a different NFL mindset, maybe we should give Deion Sanders a little bit more credit than we are. Maybe some of the credit that we were pre-giving to Bill Belichick should go over to him in Boulder for what he's done with that Colorado program.
Well, if you remember in year one for Prime, they won the first 3 games, and every game it was kind of more and more of a crescendo of hoopla around it, right? Like they had the first game at home, sold out, they win. They had beaten TCU the week before on the road, and then they kind of crescendo to the point where I believe it was Oregon. They played Oregon, and then they got thumped, and then okay, that's the end of the train. The next year is when they were solidly good throughout the year. Of course, they had his son Shedeur Sanders. They had the Heisman candidate. They had the Heisman winner Travis Hunter on both sides of the football, and that helped things. But it took him a year to understand how to work with the circus. Now, I will also say this: people who thought Bill Belichick was going to be this guy who was going to be all of a sudden open and honest and candid with the media, they got 11 words and 4 questions when Holly Rowe approached him for the pregame press conference. And the post-game press conference, he was speaking at a volume that even the mics turned all the way up couldn't catch. So you really got a lot of mumbles during the press conference after the game, which looked like a baby shower. So I think there's a lot they need to work out, but I think the one thing they need to work out right now is, like you said, just kind of, let the hoopla die a little bit, and let's just get back to playing football. If they do that, then maybe they get back on track. Me, I hope they lose every single game from here on out. Again, I hope if they get parking tickets as a team, I hope they appeal it, and I hope they lose those. But I think Bill Belichick and this crew. I think ESPN and the ACC might have had a little meeting yesterday or this morning saying, "Hey, yo, what are we going to do about this football schedule?" Because I believe they're supposed to be featured pretty prominently on ABC and ESPN over the next few weeks, and some of that might change if this continues. Now, let's move on to the rest of college football because there's obviously a couple of games we're going to talk about. But I want to start first with Lee Corso because Scott, this was his last game on College Game Day. It was despite the fact it was in Columbus, despite the fact it was back where he kind of started the headgear tradition. I thought it was pretty cool to kind of see him go out the way he did. Also, he went 6-0 in his picks, so I guess if you're going to go out that way. But I really appreciate what Lee Corso brought to the game. I will say this. For the last like 15 years, for the most part, with the exception of a couple, I usually turn it on game day just to see the headgear pick. I don't care about the discussion or anything like that for the most part. Of course, when it was Duke, I watched every second of it when it was at Duke. But I like for most of it, it's like, hey, I just want to know what Lee is going to pick for the headgear. Who's the big game of the week? Why is it a big deal? And what's he gonna do to kind of create more excitement about these picks? And the fact that he kind of created this tradition that it would just basically carry college football for a very long time, I think is very cool. The way they did it in front of the stadium, I thought was great. Even though it was in Columbus, I can still give respect to the fact that Lee Corso brought it in a great way and really made college football fun for all these years.
I think ESPN, really did a great job with the send off. I thought that, for me, I think all the retrospectives were fascinating, just seeing what Lee Corso was doing early on before College Game Day was College Game Day, and how this really was a cultural phenomenon that he created on his own back with his own ingenuity. Side note, it was very interesting comparing those early days of College Game Day when they were actually talking about, some analysis, and they were actually talking about some plays, and they were actually talking about some football, rather than the current iteration of the Pat McAfee-led College Game Day. Everyone, we can discuss, the degradation of sports media till the cows come home. But it was quite interesting and telling that at one point, I think it was Nick Saban turned to Lee and said, you were the one who turned this from football into entertainment, and said that in a very good, glowing way. And I think that's very true. Lee Corso made football entertaining to the masses. But then obviously we may have reached a point where we've overdone it a little bit on that entertainment side, and the soap opera has drowned out the football. I think that young Lee Corso was great because he took that football and he took the real analysis and the love of the game and translated that to a wider audience. And it was great seeing that retrospective element of things, seeing how he created that niche and created that cultural phenomena off of his own ingenuity. I think, we speak for everyone when we wish him the well in his retirement. I think, it is very well deserved.
I think it's also interesting to put a bow on Lee Corso. I think it's interesting that he was a coach before he joined College Game Day. Dick Vitale was a coach before he joined ESPN and has become the phenomenon that he is. And both of them were entertaining in their time where no one else was, but they also were educational at a time where no one could be both. And I think now people try to err on the side of let's just provide entertainment, and they have forgotten the analysis part, as you mentioned. And so we really appreciate Lee for bringing both in a time where college football desperately needed both, but he was able to do it with the balance and also, by all accounts, with the humility and the grace that he bestowed upon anybody that ever had the good fortune of crossing paths with. He's been a great gentleman for the game, and so for that we salute him. The only thing I wish is he would have picked Duke when we played Notre Dame, but I won't hold that against him.
He never picks against Notre Dame. He has just like Dick Vitale has his schools, Lee had his schools, and you gotta love him for that. That's part of the entertainment, value of the shtick.
Exactly. And so we'll briefly talk about the game in Columbus. Number 1 versus number 3. Ohio State beats Texas at home. They are now the number one team in the country. I think for me, it felt like a really boring game for it being number
Yes.
one versus number three. I think the one thing that really surprised me was how inefficient Texas's offense was with Arch Manning, and again, all the hype around him, whether it's warranted or not. I think it is. But I also think that it was a lot of pressure on a kid who has a name that is, that has some generational, quarterbacking knowledge to it and history to it. But also the fact that he's the number one guy at Texas, and Texas is meant to be this machine that is competing for national championships every year. They think this is the kid who could do that. He's the preseason Heisman favorite, and it just felt like they weren't quite ready for prime time yet.
As much as you can put Arch Manning down in this game and, say Texas was overrated, all of those things at least seem to be true. I think that, anyone who watched that game should probably tap the brakes on the Ohio State hype train as well. And that's not just Wolverine and me saying this. This was a game that Texas lost more than Ohio State won. Ohio State did not go out and pummel Texas to the ground when arguably they should have, with the number of mistakes that Texas was making. Ohio State just squeaked by making fewer mistakes. Ohio State has the best player in the planet, or in the college football. Arguably, he might be one of the best players in the NFL right now in Jeremiah Smith. And they struggled to get him the ball, which was something that happened in their losses last year, notably against Michigan. Jeremiah Smith, they struggled to get Jeremiah Smith the ball. That's not sustainable for Ohio State. If Julian Sand as the quarterback can't get Jeremiah Smith the ball and give him the opportunities to do the otherworldly things that he did last year, Ohio State's not the number one team. Again, week one, all those caveats need to be applied equally to everyone. But if you look at this, is like you said, it was a 14-7 game. It was 0-0 for way too damn long for a number one versus number three game. Ohio State was at home. Ohio State had, the best two players in that game, I would argue, with, Jeremiah Smith on offense and Caleb Downs on defense. They should have been the favorite. I think the Arch Manning hype was what skewed Vegas and skewed all of that nonsense, skewed the number one ranking. And when you look at it through that lens, they won a 14-7 game that they probably should have won 14-7. Great. I don't think Ohio State was the most impressive team from this weekend just because they beat the team with number one ahead of their name. Because as we just talked about, the preseason rankings are null and void and don't mean much of anything to begin with. So I think some, fair-minded fans, not just those who wear maize and blue underneath their Duke blue, might be tapping the brakes on the Ohio State hype just as much as they're slamming the brakes on the Texas hype.
Speaking of maize and blue, we have gone way too long without talking about Bryce Underwood. So let's do
this.
This
is why Jason's in the air, so he can't stop us.
Can't stop us from this. Bryce Underwood looked great, man. For a true freshman starting his first game at the Big House. I know it was just New Mexico. New Mexico actually put up a really good fight. It turned into a pretty decent game. But Bryce Underwood, I thought, was as advertised.
He is. So for those who don't follow college football outside of Duke, Bryce Underwood is the number one overall recruit in this year's class. He's from just outside of Ann Arbor, originally committed to LSU. This was a huge shock to the Michigan ecosystem. And the Michigan money train went out and said, hold on a sec. And lo and behold, a few months later, Bryce Underwood was in Michigan colors, which arguably he said was always what he wanted to. He just wanted to be shown the love. Bryce Underwood was a recruit that has come in with not just number one recruit, in the class level hype, but Trevor Lawrence, Caleb Williams level, that tier of number one recruit level hype. And the dude looks the part. He just turned 18, but he looks like a linebacker who can run 4.5 playing quarterback. His most impressive play was not any throw he made. He leveled an opposing cornerback on a block on a touchdown run midway through the first quarter. Now, I don't think Sharon Moore or anyone wearing maize and blue wants their quarterback to be lowering their shoulder into a defender to get a block.
Yeah, he said he didn't like it. He was like, I'd rather he not do that, but I love the fact that he wants to do it. He's like, but he shouldn't be doing that.
We will never see that again. But that's the type of guy who Bryce Underwood is. And also, lo and behold, he's just throwing darts all over the place. It's going to be really interesting to see, we're not just talking about Michigan because Donald and I love Michigan. Arguably the biggest game of next week is Michigan going into Norman to play Oklahoma. This is another Big Ten SEC clash that's really going to set the stage for which conference is superior. How does the college football playoff play out? The thing that struck me is that Bryce Underwood, like I said, he is known as a dual threat guy. He's known as a guy who creates with his legs. He didn't run once in this game. He didn't have a single rushing attempt. Something tells me that was the old, let's keep this in our back pocket and save this for the big game next week. It would not surprise me if you see a lot of, or not a lot, but a few of designed runs, much more Bryce Underwood keeping the ball in the QB reads against Oklahoma next week. Because this is not just your normal running quarterback. This is a running quarterback who's built like a tough, bruising running back. If he can incorporate that into the game, he's going to be a load for 3 years in college football.
College game day is going to Norman next weekend, or this coming weekend for Michigan, Oklahoma, and it's going to be a barn burner. That's one that I had circled for a very long time. But I also think to kind of cap it with Bryce Underwood, I think also there was times where he showed, hey, I could run if I want to. I'm just choosing not to. I'm just trying to. He can use his legs to kind of open up space for him to throw the ball. But he kind of had these times where he kind of stared down the linebackers to say, like, I could run past you, I can run through you, but I'm choosing to do neither right now because I'm going to throw the ball to this guy over here that's 10 yards beyond you. And so he was able to do that. He's going to be a special player in college. Again, we're talking off of one game, sure, but he looked every bit the part of the number one player in the country from Belleville, Michigan, like you said, just 10 miles away from Michigan's campus. He's a guy who was born and raised to run out of that tunnel and hit the M Club sign. And so a lot of people are very excited about his prospect.
To bring things full circle, Michigan's new offensive coordinator is Chip Lindsey, who is UNC's former offensive coordinator. He was the sort of mastermind behind the Drake May years. I wonder if, Bill Belichick might have liked to see a Chip Lindsey offense, last night against TCU. But Michigan did not look like the grinded out Jim Harbaugh, we're only going to throw it when we have to style of offense. And that was part of what the recruiting pitch to Bryce Underwood had to be. Chip Lindsey came in and Michigan did look like a modern offense. There was much more spread. There was much more shotgun. So it's going to be interesting to see how does that combine? How does the old and the new in Ann Arbor combine? And that could be the difference between Michigan being just an average top 25 team or potentially being one of those surprise college football playoff teams. And again, this is something that Duke goes out and beats Illinois this weekend. The better the Big Ten looks, the better a win against Illinois looks for the Blue Devils if we're also aspiring to those lofty goals. All of this is interconnected in the strange world of college football that we now live in.
Start by wearing blue on Saturday when you go to Wallace Wade to watch Duke beat Illinois. That's first step. But after that, it's about the guys getting it done on the field, which we hope they will. We'll probably be back at some point later this week to discuss it when Jason lands. But as we close out, Scott, any final words for you? Thanks for being on, by the way.
Thanks for having me. I think the Quinn has not stirred from what I can hear, so I think my wife will not be holding this hour for the podcast against me. So we're 1 for 1. We'll have to keep this going. Hopefully she'll continue to cooperate when my number is called to come off the bench for podcasting duties.
See, she just wants to hear her dad talk about Duke football and Michigan football, and that is all soothing for her as she fades gently into her nap. So we'll let her get back to that nap. That's Scott Rich. I'm Donald Wine. This has been episode 747 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. We will be back very, very soon in your feed, so stay tuned to us. Also, if you have emails, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, we're on Instagram, we are on Blue Sky, we are on Twitter, we are on YouTube. So subscribe to us, follow us in all of those places, and most importantly, tell a friend about the show if you have not already. We appreciate each and every one of you. It's now time for the Duke Band. They're going to play us out and take us home.
Bye.